After providing its worth in the previous decade against Libyan MiGs, this aircraft went above and beyond in the Gulf War of 1990. Even though one was lost to a SAM, the F-14 Tomcats of the US Navy went on to fight with extraordinary success, leading up to their retirement in 2006. Two types of F-14 served within the Gulf War of 1990. First was the F-14A, the second was the F-14A Plus or B, which had an improved cockpit with screens, better RWR, and the ability to carry lantern or laser-guided bombs, as well as the same engines as the F-14D, a pair of F-110 GE400s, producing around 120 kilonewtons with afterburner. However, the F-14D only entered service in the late 90s. I will call the F-14A Plus the B designation, as although it is a post-war designation, it is just faster and wouldn't be as confusing. In total, the F-14s flew 4,124 sorties, which consisted of 99 F-14s within 14 different squadrons. An F-14 shot down an Mi-8 HIP, however another Tomcat was shot down by an SA-2 SAM. This was sometimes referred to as a MiG screen. Tomcats would also provide escort for other coalition aircraft such as ground attackers or strike groups. The F-14s played an extremely wide role in the Gulf, at first flying CAPs or combat air patrols, bar caps, which were barrier combat air patrols, basically meaning F-14s placed in direction relative to the carrier fleet, to protect from where the enemy is most likely to come from. Tactical reconnaissance using TARPs was also carried out, along with battle damage assessment or BDA, which were missions where Tomcats would locate Scud missile sites, and anti-aircraft missions, which were pretty self-explanatory. Within the outbreak of war, the only battle carrier groups immediately responding to the Iraqi aggression in the August of 1990 were the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower and the USS Independence. By the start of Operation Desert Storm on the 17th of January, the number of Tomcat-equipped aircraft carriers had increased to 5, with 10 squadrons between them. USS Midway had trials on Tomcat operations, however it was deemed to have a deck inadequate for safely operating the F-14s. The F-14s could carry an assortment of weaponry. First of all, for air-to-air engagements, they would carry either 2 AIM-9Ls and 2 AIM-7Fs under the wings, and 4 AIM-54C Phoenixes under the belly, with fuel tanks under the engine hardpoints. Sometimes 4 AIM-9s and 4 AIM-7Fs. TARPs replaced some AIM-7s and AN/ALQ-167 jamming pod and a chaff dispenser. The reason why the F-14s didn't get any MiG kills in the Gulf War is down to a couple of reasons. Firstly, there was a lacking in communication on the battlefield between US Navy's carrier air groups and the US Air Force Joint Air Component Command. This also resulted in Navy pilots not being able to strictly abide by the standard rules of engagement, independently using onboard sensors, and had to rely on outside clearance from USAF E-3s to give permission to fire. However, the F-15Cs had the necessary equipment and systems to carry out this independently, and therefore were tasked with overland caps. Some F-14s with the earlier TF-30s had compressor stalls when they were flying with a high weight load, as well as flying at high altitudes at low speeds, most commonly during mid-air refueling. The F-14B with the F-110 turbofan engines proved to be much more reliable. The F-14s also played the reconnaissance role, as there were very little aircraft opposition, as most of the Iraqi Air Force had fled to Iran, and the small remainder were too scared to engage, or had been already shot down. Until the ground offensive had started, the F-14s flew defensive caps for the fleet, or went over enemy territory escorting strike aircraft. F-14s also began to fly offensive sweeps, however the Iraqis refused to show any opposition. An instance where the F-14 nearly got an air-to-air kill against a MiG was on the 17th of January, the first day of Desert Storm. On the USS Saratoga around the early morning local time, the F-14s were tasked with eliminating any MiG threats for a strike package consisting of A-6E Intruders and F-18C Hornets. The targets were H-3 air bases in western Iraq. Several bogies were seen, but there was still no permission to fire due to the E-2C Hawkeye being on the wrong frequency. The F-14 circled back after passing the battlefield, and upon doing so stumbled across 2 MiG-21 Bisses trying to sneak up on the strike group. The F-14s made them flee using their radar. However, 2 VFA-81 Sunliner F-18s shot them down using an AIM-7 and an AIM-9, while still carrying their 2,000-pound bomb payload. Later that day, the strike group of A-6s were tasked with going to H-2 and H-3, which were in the northeasterly direction away from H-2. A-6Es from Saratoga were going to H-3, and the A-6E Intruders from John F. Kennedy were sent to H-2. VF-103 F-14s provided MiG sweep. We can now introduce an F-14B, piloted by Lieutenant Tim Glazer, nicknamed Glaze, and accompanied by his Rio. In the opening stages of the mission, where they were refueling from a KC-135, his section leader reported bingo, meaning he could not get enough fuel, and therefore had to return back to the USS Saratoga early. Glaze pressed on, flying further into Iraqi airspace before passing two F-15s, which were getting on with a defensive cap along the border. Glaze acknowledged that anything beyond the F-15s would be hostiles or a bandit. A decision arose: turn right in an easterly heading towards the north side of H3 before returning back to the Saratoga, or make a left turn westward to circle around H2. Glaze picks the latter option and begin a left turn. A few moments later, a radar contact popped up, 44 miles away, heading northwest of their position, ascending fast. The Rio immediately contacted the E-2C Hawkeye, however used the wrong reference. Instead of stating the enemy's position relative to a H3 airfield, he said it relative to the F-14. With the knowledge that no other friendlies would be in the vicinity, Glaze launched an AIM-7M at a 13-mile range from the target, with a combined closure rate of 1,200 knots. His Rio then said Fox 3 instead of Fox 1. Fox is the designation for whenever you fire a missile, and the -3 ending meant one of the AIM-54Phoenixes had been launched. Fox 1 was the term used for the AIM-7, along with some other missiles. Unsurprisingly, the E-2 crew went into a complete frenzy, calling some A-6s which were 30 miles away from the Tomcat. Confused by the commotion, Glaze's Rio turned off the AWG-9 radar, causing the Sparrow to lose a radar lock. The aircraft that was fired on could have been anything, but most likely either a Soviet-produced MiG-25 PDS Foxbat or a MiG-23 ML Flogger G of No. 73 Squadron. Just in case the Flogger or the Foxbat decided to retaliate against the Tomcat, Glaze made a left bank and headed back. After evading 3 SA-6 SAMs, the Rio set a course for a tanker. However, due to bad weather, they had to redirect to Al Jof airfield in Saudi Arabia, along with an A-6E which was damaged by a hit from a Roland SAM. Bad news continued when Glaze and his Rio returned back to the carrier. Everyone thought they had an air-to-air kill, however the AWACS crews thought that the A-6 was shot down. After some time, an investigation into the incidents proved that a different A-6 had been downed by the Roland SAM. Glaze could only fly caps over Saratoga until the end of the cruise. Now let's look at an instance where an F-14 managed to get an air-to-air kill against an Mi-8. Our next crew are Lieutenant Stuart Meat Brose and his Rio, Commander Ron Bongo McElraft, which were from VF-1 Wolfpack. The Tomcat was tasked with providing cover for an EA-6B on a jamming mission, supporting an airstrike over occupied Kuwait. They took off from CV-61, USS Ranger in their F-14A, along with another F-14A from VF-1. The two Tomcats were told to meet up with a KC-135 tanker and proceed to a cap position. This change in tasking was unusual, and the crews had to find the new cap position on their navigation charts. However, they had no charts covering the northern side of Iraq, so they had to make an assumption that the area was between Gulf and Baghdad, where the F-15s were getting their kills. Bongo had realised that the radar was not working, so they could not use the radar-guided missiles. Around 10 minutes after the pair of Tomcats arrived at the cap station, the controller broke radio silence, saying Wolfpack engage bandits, vector 210-36, angle low, nose on. In other words, the E-3 had picked up an unidentified enemy aircraft 36 miles off the Tomcat's current position. Since Bongo couldn't get the radar to work, they passed the lead of the interception to the other Tomcat. After making sure they had permission to fire, they switched the master's arm switch on. Now heading to their unknown target, the F-14s were updated by the E-3. The F-14s now had a mile of separation between each other, and levelled off at 3,000 feet. And after a few seconds, Bongo had spotted their heli. Brose pulled a 7G turn and got a visual on the heli, which they identified as an Iraqi Mi-8 HIP armoured transport. Brose pulled out of the turn, pulling the nose up and drew the Tomcat left. He tried to get a lock with the AIM-9 but wasn't successful, so he tried to get some separation between his aircraft and the Mi-8. Then he moved into a shallow dive, coming down at the HIP's 9 o'clock, from around a mile away, trying to get a lock on with the AIM-9L. After finding the spot where the tone was just right, Brose began to fire the missile. After frantic calls from Bongo in the back seat, as the ground was rapidly approaching, the AIM-9 flew straight off the left hardpoint. For a second it looked like the AIM-9 hadn't tracked the target properly, however suddenly began a turn and led itself straight into the Mi-8, transforming the helicopter into a fiery ball of flame. Bongo then told the E-3 that they had downed one helicopter. They then formed up with two other Tomcats from VF-1 and got some fuel from the KC-135. They returned to their cap's position before getting fuel from a KC-10. Before the E-3 asked them to perform a BDA, battle damage assessment, on a targeted area. After completing the BDA, they had returned to USS Ranger, after a 6.5 hour long sortie. Sadly, there is no HUD footage of this engagement, partly due to Bongo forgetting to turn on the recorder. The F-14s went on to participate in several more wars before the US Navy retired them in 2006. With the F-18 Hornet proving its worth, the F-14s were upgraded to the D variant and filled the role of the A-6s, and also flew bombing missions. Well, that wraps up this very interesting video on the F-14 in the Gulf War. Please remember to like and subscribe. I hope you have enjoyed, and as always, stay safe in these difficult times.